up? What is happening? It's week 2 of the DFS. It's the DJ Nation Pod. We're coming at you. Your host, Ryan Williams at Ryan Alexander _W is where you can find me on Twitter. And I'm joined by my usual suspect, Kevin Steele at Fantasy Wrath 13. That's episode 58 of the DJ Nation podcast. Kev, how we doing?
I'm doing well. It's another week, I'm a forward-thinking kind of person. Did not have the most optimal week last week. Really had struggled with basically I just spread myself too thin. There was so many plays I liked, and I wanted to play them all instead of just I made a cardinal sin of not tightening my player pool enough. And Jameis, that dude is still dead to me. He just fucked me all week. And I had a lot of Jameis, and it didn't work out.
He gave you the treatment, Kev. How was Dare? How was Jamin and Dare?
He gave me the business. Okay. There's something to like though about Dare though. He played the final 2-minute drill. He didn't get as many opportunities. I think he got like 4 receptions or 4 or 5 targets, something like that. Didn't do a ton with them, but I definitely think that it is confirmed that he is the pass catching back in that offense. So that is definitely something to monitor there. But it was not a smash week for him, but I felt like a lot of the low-owned plays that I was on did work out. Chris Conley was a guy that I know I called out and talked about as a revenge week play, and he was 3,100, and he went out and got 100 yards and or 97 yards, and a touchdown, so that worked out.
No, absolutely, Kev. I mean, there were a ton of low-owned plays, and we can talk about that as we get into the slate for the week 2 DFS that popped off, and I think it's important to kind of, volume is king, and there were so many low-owned options. Week 1, we don't really know kind of where things are going to go or what the coaching strategies and offensive schemes are really going to be. But, there were some schemes that came to fruition. I mean, a guy that I talked about last week was Cole Beasley, and, he was 3,600 last week, got 9 targets, had more air yards than Zay Jones in the offense. And while he didn't really, go crazy, he was an excellent cash game play if you decided to pay him. And we see that, there's only a certain amount of options that Buffalo is willing to trot out there and that Josh Allen trusts. So as we get into, the slate, it'll be I'm interested to hear you. You love the low-owned plays. You like to call them out, the Tyler Crofts of the world, the Dan Arnolds of the world, both being at tight ends. But I'm curious to see where your head's at this week, Kev. It's a DFS DJ Nation, guys. You can find us on Twitter at DJ Nation Pod. Like and subscribe the podcast. You can have that on iTunes. You can have that on Twitch, on Stitcher. And we're everywhere. We're trying to, get everything going. This is the second week of regular season. We're on StreamYard, broadcasting to you live. You go on YouTube and see us on Twitch. I think we're on one more platform, right, Kev? What am I forgetting? YouTube, Periscope.
Yeah.
I knew I'd get it. We're working out the kinks here. But yeah, we appreciate all the love that you guys have been getting, rating and reviewing us, the podcast, and then liking and subscribing to the YouTube channel. It's really helping us out, and we appreciate all the comments and the love we've been getting. And then we got the Slack chat too. Guys, the Slack chat has been popping. We were live in there on Sunday. Guys were in there as early as 8 a.m. Central Time, kind of just talking the plays, talking news, what everybody was seeing. It's a really good community in there. You can DM the DJ Nation Pod or DM Kevin at Fantasy Rat 13, and we can get you guys in there. And we'd love to have you. And you can see on the stream here, for those of you who aren't listening for those of you who are just listening and not viewing us on YouTube currently right now or later, you can see that we're doing the slate a lot earlier than we normally do. 85 hours until the slate locks there. So a lot of this is going to be preliminary items that Kevin and I are getting into. But you know how we do it here at the DJ Nation Pod. We like to break it down position by position. And Kev, let's get right into it and talk about quarterbacks this week. So quarterback was very interesting to say the least. I don't know what other words you could describe it as. We got Pat Mahomes at the top, who Maddie Dickinson was on with us last week, talked about how Pat Mahomes was his favorite play going against that Jacksonville defense, and there were ways to kind of expose them. And we had a scare in that game with him, getting banged up for injury, leaving the game, coming back in. But I mean, smashed with Sammy Watkins, missed Kelsey wide open for a touchdown, doing a no-look pass. I mean, Pat Mahomes is so fun to watch. And he gets Oakland now, who the defense looked good, but they do have some injuries. Their starter safety, rookie safety is going to be out, John Abram. So Pat Mahomes could be in another good spot again. Lamar Jackson went ballistic last week, putting up, let's see what the actual numbers were here, 36. Is that right? Yeah, 36 DK points on DraftKings, throwing for 5 touchdowns, not really rushing. Interested to see how he, fares in week 2. Deshaun Watson comes in third at 6,600. Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady also smashed last week against the Steelers. And then Dak Prescott, Russell Wilson, Drew Brees, Phillip Rivers, and Jimmy Garoppolo round out the 6K range. Kev, I'm curious to see what you're thinking about with quarterback this week. I can tell you right now for myself, I'm looking at this slate. I love Jared Goff this week at home. I think I was a week too early on him last week. I played him in cash, which seems like a mistake now looking back on it, as high as I was on Josh Allen. And it just in a better spot. And Josh Allen with the rushing upside, I think, is always just going to be a cash game play. But Jared Goff, we have been privy to his home road splits, right? So, 22-3, I believe, 22 touchdowns to 3 interceptions at home versus 10 touchdowns to 9 interceptions on the road. That came to fruition last week against Carolina. That game was very sloppy. And now he gets to go against the New Orleans defense that Deshaun Watson just pretty much obliterated. And it's pretty much a shame that Texans lost that game. So I'm looking at Jared Goff a lot this week. I'm liking Ben Roethlisberger as well, too. Talk about home road splits with Big Ben. He loves to smash at home. The pieces around him to fit into your lineups, Kev, are pretty cheap. You got a Vance McDonald who's around like 3,400 or so on DraftKings. As we're looking at this, James Washington, who had the third most air yards in week 1, he comes in at 3,600. And then we know Juju Smith-Schuster, he's 7,500. But if Juju's banged up, I think this is a great way to kind of, get your offensive pieces in for cheap and not have to worry about things as much. What are you seeing, Kev, preliminary here at the quarterback position, and where are you leaning on?
Yeah, I mean, I think just looking at the top, Pat Mahomes again is in a great spot. At Oakland, they really shouldn't have any issues. There's a big difference between facing Joe fucking Flacco in the Denver Broncos getting to face the best offense in the league. Now, of course, they are going to be without Tyreek Hill, and I think that could really bring down his ownership a little bit, where people may not be as high on him as they otherwise would in this matchup. But even at 7,500, I mean, that is a lot to pay, considering the next best is 6,700. We're talking about almost a full grand difference in price here. But I think that ceiling is definitely there. I mean, he's the one that you can almost count on a weekly basis to really, to really pop off. I mean, if you look last week, I mean, there were all kinds of quarterbacks. I mean, Lamar Jackson with 36, like you mentioned, Dak Prescott with 36. I mean, Matt Stafford had 31.
Right.
Keenum had 30.
Oh my gosh, yes.
I mean,
so frustrating against Philly. Oh.
Yeah. And so there was a lot of plays there. So like I have no problem going back to that well and playing Pat Mahomes at 7,500. I think you can easily pair him with Kelsey, or if you wanted to go with Sammy Watkins, who is about as heavily priced as I've seen in a very, very, very long time. But I think rightfully so there. And we'll talk about that when we get into wide receivers. A couple other guys you probably could go with as more of some flyers. But past that, like I kind of want to pay down at quarterback, because I think that there's a lot of options here at quarterback this week. I mean, you look at Derek Carr, who this Chiefs defense, as I know it's only 1 week, but there's a lot to confirm here. That the fact that the Chiefs defense is not that good. Their secondary is suspect, and I mean they just let Gardner Minshew a 6th-round pick, just have a
Yep.
pretty good day. I mean, they did end up with 2 interceptions off of him, but regardless, like that never should have happened. And he was able to move the ball, threw some touchdowns, and now you have Derek Carr at home in this matchup, and they're going to have to play. They're going to have to play to catch up to Kansas City. They're going to have to throw the ball a ton. And so, like, Derek Carr at 5,100, like cash, GPP, whatever you want to put him in, like this feels like a smash spot for him. He's played very well in his career at home against the Chiefs. Now, on the road, it's a different story. I would never want to play Derek Carr in Kansas City, but at home, in Oakland, I think this is a viable spot for him at 5,100. So I think you can easily play him here and feel pretty good about it. Moving up from there, I think Andy Dalton at 54. I mean, he put up 25.7 DK points last week on the road in Seattle, which is one of the tougher environments to play in the entire league. So I mean, I was very impressed with it. We saw John Ross go off in that game. We saw Tyler Boyd had a solid game. So, like, there was a lot to like there. And at 5,400, going against San Francisco, the defense doesn't scare me. They're at home now. Like, I think this team, like, with the weapons they have and this new coaching philosophy, we sort of talked about it last week with Andy Dalton, is I think he's a viable option. And, depending on matchups, like, I think there's going to be weeks, especially once they get A.J. Green back into this offense. Like, I think this offense could be pretty fun this year and better than what a lot of people thought it was going to be. I don't think defense is all that great, but overall, like I think Andy Dalton is a viable option at 5,400. He's not going to have any ownership whatsoever, so I think that is a place you could go. Kirk Cousins against Green Bay. This game has some shootout potential. It went especially with it being in Green Bay. I think you look at this as like a bounce back spot for Aaron Rodgers as well. But Kirk Cousins only threw the ball 10 times last week. 10 times. Like. People had to thought that like you is your ESPN app broken? Is something's going on here? Because he threw the ball 10 times. It's insane for anybody who played the entire game. But that's not going to be the case this week. He's definitely going to have to throw the ball. And I think this is with no ownership. Nobody's going to want to play at 5,300 Kirk Cousins, especially after what happened last week. We know they want to run the ball first. So I think he's definitely in play. So he's somebody that I like too as well. At 53, there's just a lot of guys this week that I'd rather pay down. And I think that's usually the most optimal approach. I mean, you certainly, if you want to pay up for, like I said, Pat Mahomes or Lamar Jackson, Deshaun Watson's at a decent spot. I already mentioned Aaron Rodgers, like Tom Brady going against we already saw how bad the Dolphins defense is. I mean, that is a train wreck. So, I mean, there's certainly other ways if you wanted to pay up, you could go. But for me, I just don't think there's a need to. I think there's enough options down here in the 5K range. You already mentioned Big Ben. I love that as a bounce back spot too at home. So, like, I just think for me, I'm probably paying down at quarterback this week.
Yeah, no, I love that, Kev. I mean, especially when we're talking about getting 2 or 3 options with the quarterback that you can play him with. You mentioned Derek Carr. That's a great game. High over under total there. And you compare him with guys like Tyrell Williams and Darren Waller, who haven't seen their price increase like guys like Sammy Watkins and Hollywood Brown, because they played on that Monday night slate when the slate was already released for Sunday, main slate, week 2. So their prices were locked in. And you're talking about high volume guys there in Oakland with him. I mean, Waller, I'm not sure how many targets he saw. It felt like double digits. Well, he saw 8 targets. And then I believe Tyrell Williams was over double digits. So that's incredible. And a guy like Josh Allen, I mean, it's incredible what this guy continues to keep doing from a DFS perspective, but almost getting 20 DK points, and this guy looked like the Buffalo offense was left for dead pretty much in that first half, not really getting anything going. And then all of a sudden he comes out, starts throwing bombs to John Brown, is able to rush in a touchdown, had 10 red zone rush attempts, Kev. It's like this guy is fantasy goodness. He's not he's whatever the opposite of being allergic to scoring is. He just loves to find the end zone. And we know now, it seems like we have a good idea who to pair him up with John Brown, with Cole Beasley, and maybe even Devin Singletary, who got going there late. These are all cheap guys to pair him with. So I love those calls. And Andy Dalton too, especially pairing him with John Ross, who's still way too cheap, getting Tyler Boyd even there with him, or Gio Bernard, who we can talk about when the running backs come up. Um, I want to ask you, Kev, real quick, back at the top, like Tom Brady at 6,400, he comes in at I believe, the fifth highest price quarterback on DraftKings. Really, really put up big numbers there, 36 attempts against the Steelers at home last week. Now he travels on the road to Miami, which is always a favorable matchup for Tom Brady. And the spread has been much talked about already early in this week, 19 points or 18.5 point favorites for New England. Do you think there's going to be enough fantasy goodness to roll out Tom Brady here in this matchup, or is this one you'd rather kind of avoid the passing game and maybe try and attack it from the rushing side?
There's certainly some pieces there that I think you could target in this game. I feel like this is a game where they could really get up early and then but then again, you never know, because Bill Belichick, even after he puts his foot on your throat, he will just keep pushing down. He's somebody that does not let off the brakes at all. He's not somebody who, will scale back the offense once they get ahead. So, and I don't know, like, it's crazy, right? Like, we just saw exactly what happened with Baltimore just destroying the Ravens, or with Baltimore destroying the Dolphins. But I don't know, like it wouldn't be crazy to me to say that the Patriots this could be a closer game than we think. With this being a divisional game, with this being, we have to remember, Brian Flores knows this team. He was obviously the coordinator there last year. He was there in New England last year. And so, like, he has he's familiar with this offense. He's familiar with this defense. So, like, it wouldn't surprise me at all, like, if this game was a little bit closer than we suspected because of that. And, like, the Dolphins always seem to play the Patriots well, down in Miami. So I don't know, like, so with that, like, yeah, I do think Tom Brady is viable, and I think you could play him. He's not, what is he, 6,500, I believe, on DraftKings?
Yeah, 6,400.
Look at last week. He had 28.6 DK points in a week where they dominated the Steelers. Just undressed the Steelers in that game, and he still put easy. Oh, come on. I know you're the Steeler fan in here, but come on, that was a horrible performance.
It was terrible. It was a terrible outing. But we're it's DFS, and we have short memory, so that's why we're on the bounce back. We've been around.
So regardless, I think Tom Brady's he's definitely in play. If you want to stack him with a Julian Edelman, Josh Gordon, I definitely think you can. But other than that, I think that's probably, there's no way I could play Antonio Brown. He is on the state. Yeah, he is practicing with the Patriots this week after everything that's happened there. And I guess we'll get to that when we get to wide receiver. But so the pass catchers there. So yeah, I think if you wanted to stack him with somebody, you can. But yes, certainly he's in play, especially against Miami.
I hear you on that, Kev. I think, in multi-entering teams, I have to have some exposure to the Tom Brady side of things here. I just don't want to miss out on it. And, definitely expecting points to be scored there from the Patriots side of things. Kev, two more quarterbacks I want to talk about before we move on here. Drew Brees coming in at 6,200 here. Another offense that just looked anemic to start the game against Houston at home, no less, in the Superdome. But then he comes back, 43 attempts, has a big comeback win, gets over 300 yards. So that's a plus bonus there on DK, 2 touchdowns. In this game, he's traveling on the road to take on the Rams, who I think there are ways to expose this Rams defense. It's just Cam couldn't connect with guys on Carolina in this, but Drew Brees can. But outside, we talked about home road splits earlier with some of these guys, and we kind of see the inverse with Drew Brees here, or not the inverse. We see oppositely for Drew Brees that he just doesn't travel well. But this is such a good game, or should be such a good game, at least on paper, to have fantasy points scored. The problem is when you're talking about who do you pair him with, you want to get guys like Alvin Kamara, you want to get guys like Michael Thomas, and then to run it back on the other side, it's so expensive to do with $6,000 price receivers on the Rams, and then potentially Todd Gurley or Malcolm Brown if you want to take that route. So is Drew Brees worth paying for this week when you're talking about Phillip Rivers is right there at 6,100, Jared Goff is 5,900 in that same game on the other side, or just paying up for a guy like Tom Brady who's $200 more.
I don't think you need to. I don't think this is a spot where you need to. Now, if this was in New Orleans, inside the dome, then I would probably have a totally different feeling here. Now, this game is going to, you have to. I mean, we kind of, I don't know if you ever really mentioned it, but I mean, this is the game last year that this is the team that kicked the Saints out of the Super Bowl last year. So bad blood here. This is also, if you remember, where Marcus Peters got undressed by Michael Thomas, and they had that back and forth. Like, I think there's a little bit of bad blood here in this game. So I don't know. Like, I feel like this game could be a little, maybe not as high scoring as we think that it could be. Just because it feels like maybe a game where maybe it ends up being more of a 24-20, 27-24 type of game. I mean, certainly in the range of possibility that could be wrong, but with this being in LA, like, I know the New Orleans offense does not travel as well outside of the dome as it is inside. So for me, like, I just don't think the upside's there. I think they definitely they still want to run the ball and do that. So, like, I don't know. Like, for me, like, I just don't think I could get to Drew Brees, knowing that I feel like that Russell Wilson, for example, who is the same price, who's on the road in a game where I feel like they're going to have to be they're going to have to score some points here. I don't think they're going to be able to just run the ball the entire time on Pittsburgh. I think, that this game could be more high scoring and a really solid one to target. And so I think I'd rather have Russell Wilson. Dak Prescott looked fan-fucking-tastic last week against the Giants, now traveling on the road in Washington. But at 6,300, I think he's in play. So, like, those guys, like, I would just rather play some of these guys than a Drew Brees.
No, I hear you on that. I think I'm falling on that same wavelength as far as from the quarterback side to attack it with New Orleans. But I do love pieces in that game on the New Orleans side that we can talk about later. The other quarterback I wanted to ask you before we move on to running back was Marcus Mariota. Kev, what is going on here exactly? Only 24 attempts, but 3 touchdowns on the road against Cleveland. Didn't get to 300 passing yards, which is what we like to see out of our DK quarterbacks, but had a couple rushes there and was able to get to over 24 DraftKings points. I mean, is this somebody that we can trust? He's going against Indy, who just let up a ton of points, both passing and rushing, to the Chargers. And now he's at home in front of this home crowd who, kind of has something to root for. If this Titans team can be anything of substance in a division that's pretty much wide open, I think it's fair to say at this point, outside of, the Texans, really. What are we doing with Marcus Mariota, and is the team good enough offensively to sustain somebody who we think could, take down GPPs or even be utilized in cash?
I think maybe he's more of a cash game option, but, like, I don't know. Like, I just don't know if the ceiling is necessarily there. Like, this might have been the best game you possibly could have got from him, and the 248 yards, 3 touchdowns with the 24 DK points. I don't think this game projects to be, all that high scoring. And if it's not, like, neither one of these offenses, really excite me from a DFS perspective. Like, there was certainly some things to take away from that game. A.J. Brown, for example, the rookie wide receiver, he had a good game. I mean, it was really rookie wide receiver week this week. So many rookie wide receivers really popped off. So, I mean, right now that game sits at a 44, total. Like, that's one of the lower totals on the slate here. So, like, I don't know. Like, I just can't see myself targeting that and really wanting anything to do with that, because I just don't think you have much of an upside. Now, maybe, like I said, like you mentioned in cash, maybe that's more of a viable strategy. I'm not much of a cash game guy, so I mean, you can speak on that more than me. But for me, like, it just wouldn't be something I would want to go to.
Yeah, I mean, I just can never trust Marcus Mariota, so I couldn't put cash money towards him. But I think it's something to definitely monitor if this offense is really, trying to turn a leaf, or maybe the Browns just got exposed. Who knows? That's the exciting part about week one is that, we see all these things we think we know what situations are going to be, and they flip it on us 180 when we get to the next week here. Let's move on to running backs, Kev. Week two, we got running backs at the top. Saquon Barkley and Ezekiel Elliott, Alvin Kamara are your high-priced running backs this week, all over 8K. Ezekiel, we don't have to worry about him. Holdout is done. He's going to be playing. He's only 8,700, which seems too cheap. It seems like they priced him off of the volume that he received last game and not what we know Zeke can be. Saquon Barkley, 9,200, only 20 DK points last week. But I feel like in this game against Buffalo, it was a fast-paced game that the Giants played in there against the Cowboys. They really tried to get the ball out fast and kind of have Eli hurry it up a little bit. So in this matchup against Buffalo with such a strong front seven, I think, we could see some Saquon Barkley catches. And I love him from a cash standpoint of just paying up and getting guys that we know are going to touch the ball 20 plus times. And, even with 11 attempts rushing, he's still getting to 20 DK points without even scoring a touchdown. It's incredible. So I love the usage there for him. Dalvin Cook comes in at the fourth highest price at 7,200. That's eligible. He went bananas last week in that game against Atlanta. David Johnson, it was nice to see him bounce back in this offense, which looks like it could potentially be something if Kyler can get his act together, but going against Baltimore seems rough. And then Todd Gurley comes in at 7K. And much has been made about him this week, Kev, about, is he going to be fantasy goodness that people have thought of him as, or is Malcolm Brown legit? And this is pretty much what they told us all off season, is that Gurley is going to be limited, but he still saw a majority of the touches, Kevin. I think, Todd Gurley is going to be in my article this week in the Contrary 10. 7K for a running back, and this game is expected to have high points scored. And he was still involved when they needed him to be. It's just they didn't have to put him out there because Carolina couldn't get anything done. But when they needed him on those final drives to kind of get points scored, he came back in the game. He was utilized as a pass catcher. So if New Orleans can keep this game close, I think we can still see Todd Gurley in this matchup, and I'm hoping that we can get some red zone touches out of him. The other two running backs, Kev, that I absolutely love this week are Damian Williams out of KC, 5,800. Saw four. He was the only running back this week or in week one to see 4 red zone targets and over 4 red zone rushes as well. So it seems like he has a role there in KC. And now we have no Tyreek Hill. I think he's going to be utilized even more in the passing game, but you follow the Chiefs a lot more than I do. So I'm hoping that you can tell me something good about him, but he's only 5,800 this week going against Oakland. It's just too incredible of a spot, I think, to get this guy. And then Sony Michel, if I'm not playing Tom Brady, I got to play Sony. He's always, or I guess what we know as Sonny Michel in the time that he's been in the league is he always has big games when New England is on the road and road favored in a matchup, or if the game gets out of hand and we can project him for 18 or plus touches. And that's a game that we have here in Miami where they should just be up so big that this guy is just going to be run as a workhorse, and he's put up some big numbers in those roles. Kev, talk to me about running backs and what you're seeing at this position, and if there's anybody else, cheaper than those guys that I mentioned that we can go to.
Yeah, so I mean, for me this week, I think that up top, I think Alvin Kamara, Dalvin Cook are two places that you can definitely start. Start your builds. I have no. Saquon Barkley is tough this week because of Buffalo. Like, I really respect that defense, and although that they weren't fantastic with stopping Le'Veon Bell last week. Le'Veon Bell actually had a pretty decent game last week. I feel like that this is a game that is going to be ugly, and I just don't know if you need to pay up to $9,200 range. I'd rather just if I had to drop down to Zeke Elliott 8,700. But in terms of just overall ceiling, I feel like that's Alvin Kamara and Dalvin Cook. Like we saw Dalvin Cook last week just actually go ham. He scored 29 DK points. Matchup now on the road against Green Bay. I think that while I don't know if he gets as many carries, I do think that he has much more a better opportunity to see even more targets in this offense. Like he didn't. I mean, obviously, when your quarterback throws 8 times, that's a problem. Or 8 times, I mean. So I mean, he only had 2 targets.
Throws 8 times, and he has 2 of them.
Yeah, and you can't. I mean, you can't really take anything from that. I mean, he still had 20% target share. So, anyways, those 2 are 100% my 2 favorite plays up top. Once you get past that, I feel like if Jacksonville could somehow keep it close and Leonard Fournette becomes interesting, that's definitely his backfield. That there's no denying that. And so at 6,300, Leonard Fournette, that's something you could certainly do. I don't love it, especially being on the road, but I think that 6,300 that it kind of bakes into that offset. I mean, he also was targeted 6 times, so that's something you definitely want to see. At 13 carries for 66 yards last week. He also received 6 targets. I mean, 19 total attempts or 19 total touches. Excuse me. That I think that. That's very viable, and I think that with him being the absolute lead back here, that is certainly something you could do, and especially when we're talking about Houston, who doesn't really have a great defense. Like I'm not really worried about that. So the only issue is that are the Texans able to neutralize the legend, the man that is Gardner Minshew with that beautiful mustache that he's got going on there. So I think you could go there, but I absolutely 100% agree with Sony Michel at 6,200. I think this could really be a Sony Michel type of week. I mean, Sony Michel last week had 1.4 DK points. 1.4. I think there's a lot of people that will say that, oh, fuck that. I ain't playing Sony Michel. And I think that's a mistake. I think he's one of the better plays on this entire slate that I think that you could target, especially value-wise. And right below him, I think you have Austin Eckler, who I feel like is going to be very chalky. He put up 39.4 DK points last week. And you can even say Detroit, but you have to remember that Detroit's run defense is very respectable, especially once they added Snacks Harrison there to that defense. So I love Sony Michel. I definitely want to have some exposure to him. You talked about, Damian Williams and then LaShawn McCoy situation. I mean, you kind of hit on it a little bit. He had 13 attempts last week for 26 yards. Not what you want to see. But what did look good is that he did receive 6 targets. I think he's clearly more of the pass catching back. He's still going to get carries. I think he starts most games. But LaShawn McCoy, I will say this, low key, looks pretty good. I was not expecting to see some of the stuff that he was able to do. He still has it. He still has the burst. He may not be as fast as what he used to be. He may not be as agile than what he used to be. But he definitely still has it in him. So I think it's a small problem for Damian Williams, but something I'm not really worried about this week. And like I said, I feel like pass catching wise, he is going to always be involved there. And I think that's kind of be how maybe he gets, 10 touches to 10 rushes a game, but he always, you always see him with 5 to 6 reception or targets a game. I think that's certainly in the realm of possibility for him. Maybe 10 to 12 touch, or maybe 10 to 12 carries, and somewhere in the range of 4 to 6 targets every week. I think is certainly something you could look at. And at his price tag at 5,800, that is pretty juicy. He should have actually had an even better week last week. He could have had 2 touchdowns, but ended up with 18.5. Still something that you're looking for. Going down, I think we're going to have to monitor the situation with Joe Mixon and Gio Bernard for right now. that we don't really know what's going to happen quite yet there with that situation. So I think that's one way you could go, especially if Joe Mixon is ruled out. That I think we've seen Gio Bernard in the past be able to really take off. Once we get down to like the lower tier running backs, one that I think that like is pretty gross, but I think there has to be some appeal there. And one of them is Chris Thompson, who is 3.9K on DraftKings and going again at home against Dallas. We know Darius Guice has pretty much all been ruled out to this point. So like there's definitely some intrigue there with Chris Thompson. I mean, he is the pass catching back of this offense. Now with Adrian Peterson going to be assuming the role, like he received 10 targets last week. Yeah, 7 receptions on 10 targets, 68 yards. Only did get 3 carries for 10 yards. But if they get behind against Dallas and this Dallas offense continues to roll, like Chris Thompson is 100% going to be utilized like this every week. And like, they don't really have anybody. We sort of talked about this last week. I remember kind of talking about Chris Thompson because of right now they basically have, Terry McLaurin. And then they have, Trey Quinn, who scored a touchdown for them. And then past that, you have Paul Richardson, where Jordan Reed's still working his way through the concussion protocol, so we're not 100% sure if he's going to play. That'll give you Vernon Davis. So, like, there's a lot of opportunity here for Chris Thompson, especially at 3,900. So, like, I think that he's definitely somebody people should be targeting here. I know some people will probably want to play like Adrian Peterson, who's 3,400, and is likely going to be the starting running back. But in this matchup, where I feel like that they're probably going to be playing more from behind, I just don't think I would, even at 3,400. Like, I'm just not overly excited about that matchup for him, where he could be basically, having very little role. Right now, I think those are probably the running backs that I most want to target. And if you, like I said, if you really want to go, deep into it, I think it would be Chris Thompson.
Yeah, no, I mean, Chris Thompson with the target share he was able to get is just ridiculous. And it's a role that we've seen him carve out for Washington during his tenure there. Another guy whose role I think we need to talk about in the offense, Kevin, is this rookie Devin Singletary for Buffalo. Only 4 attempts on the ground, got 70 yards on those 4 attempts, which is ridiculous, and then saw 6 targets out of the backfield, and most importantly, received all of the backfield targets for Buffalo. So, when you're talking about a guy like Josh Allen, who is going to be aggressive and push it down the field, but kind of, likes to do these little dump off passes to the running backs that he has available, which is what we kind of saw, Shady make his bread and butter with last year when he was fantasy relevant. I think it's going to be very important to monitor a guy like Devin Singletary, 71% snap share for him as well, too, for Buffalo. He only comes in at 4,200. Is there any appeal for you, Kev, for them this week, even with the low implied total here for both of these teams, just because of the work that this guy is seeing and a Giants team that really didn't look all that tough against defending the run last week?
So if I remember correctly, Devin Singletary, he didn't play much until like the second half in that game,
right?
Which is concerning. And now, don't get me wrong, like I don't know why he's just not the starter. He's clearly the best option they have there in Buffalo. I don't understand why they're playing with this Frank Gore, bullshit, really. And until we see, I think, a larger workload and larger snap share for him, I think it's hard to really roster him because you still know what you're going to get. Like, I think some of the upside is certainly there for him, but like, I just don't know if I would go out of my way to really add him.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree with you, Kev, but I think the important thing about that is that, they really needed offense going in the second half. And the fact that they chose to go the route of Devin Singletary to kind of get them going, who is a rookie, is pretty promising. And something to monitor. And I'm not saying by any means that he's a slam dunk player, jam and play, but, there are some teams where I do have, a Josh Allen stack to run it back with Saquon. And playing a Devin Singletary too, kind of interests me if he's getting the backfield targets, and not only that, but 100% share of them. It's not a situation, I don't feel like, that we saw in Chicago that was, dying to have some type of offense explosion and didn't have their rookie running back on the field to kind of help them get back in the game. So I just think it's important to monitor, and especially, at this price here, if he is going to be the lead back, did, outsnap Frank Gore, we could see his price kind of increase towards the weeks go on. Kev, let's talk about real quick here. I want to talk about two running backs who actually played against each other in the same game, and that's Josh Jacobs coming in at 4,700 in that, going against the Chiefs in that game, and then Carlos Hyde, who comes in at 3,600 here. Both these running backs we got to see on Monday, not against each other, but we got to see them on Monday. Carlos Hyde goes against Jacksonville, 3,600. Looked like, there could be something there. 8.3 yards per carry. Really, Houston was going to him early and often, not Duke Johnson, to kind of establish the run here. And this Jacksonville team, is really kind of just in disarray. Are you interested in playing Carlos Hyde?
Not really. I think Jacksonville's front seven is still good enough to shut down Carlos Hyde. And I feel like this is a game where Deshaun Watson's going to have to do much more of the heavy lifting here. I see the appeal at 3,600. Like, you don't need him to do a ton to meet value. And so, like, I understand it, but, like, if it's me, I'd probably just pay up to some of these other players who I just feel like are probably in better spots overall. So
I hear you.
I don't hate it, but I just don't know. I just don't think there's much upside there, And then as in regards to Josh Jacobs, I feel like that with him, again, he's somebody that played pretty well at 23 carries, 85 yards last week. Only targeted once, and that's a little bit of a concern for me. I want to see more target share, especially for somebody who's going to get as many touches and opportunities as he did and does. Because if Jalen Richard continues to be like the pass catching running back there, that's going to hurt his value. I just don't think that at 4,700 in a game where I feel like they're going to be playing from behind, he's not going to run the ball 23 times next week. That's just not going to happen. So we're going to get to see, how this plays out now with him as not being able to get these type of workload, and ends up, and how things turn out. But like for me, I don't hate it. Like, if you wanted to play him in GPPs or something like that and have some exposure to him, like I don't hate it, because obviously he could find his way into the end zone, and he was impressive. I know that 28-yard reception he had was a pretty play, and like you see some of the things that the Raiders, why they brought him in and what he can do there. So like there's some appeal, but it's just not something I'd go out of my way for.
I hear you. It should be mentioned that Jalen Richard, and I know this because I played a ton of him on Monday, really killed some of my lines. He didn't see any targets in that game, Kev. He was basically non-existent. He did have his couple snaps, but he wasn't out there running routes. It seemed like mostly just pass blocking, to say the least. So I'm not sure really what his role is or going to be, but also, the Raiders were kind of having their way with this Denver defense on Monday. So I don't know if maybe he didn't need to be utilized. Kev, real quick before we move on to receivers, I have Matt Breida here pulled up, and I think the San Francisco situation is worth talking about, where you have Matt Breida and Raheem Mostert as your running backs for this week. Tevin Coleman's banged up and could be for a significant time. They're going against Cincinnati. I agree with you, Kev. I do think there should be some big points scored in this game. So is this a game that we can target these running backs for San Francisco in? I know Matt Breida has been a guy Evan Silva has talked about a lot. He's got a lot of steam backing him in the fantasy community. And last week had 15 attempts. Didn't really do much with them. Only one target out of the backfield. Raheem Mostert actually, I believe, was a little bit more explosive. Yeah, 40 yards. Also seeing one target. Who would you be willing to target of these running backs in that game?
I think Breida would probably be the one right now. But I mean, he seems to get pulled from every game because of some sort of injury. It's really insane, to be honest with you, to see the to see what happens with Breida. He is a decent pass catching back as well. Mostert is somebody who I think is very explosive, and I think that in other weeks, like especially once we get into bye weeks and everything else, where our player pools are a little bit more tightened and you have less options and things of that nature, that maybe you could consider it. But right now, I don't know how much interest I would have in it. I will say that we know that especially in San Francisco, and Kyle Shanahan is more than happy to utilize two running backs. And so right now, like I definitely think he has a role. But I just don't think the ceiling is as high that I would want to roster him even at 3,800.
No, I hear you on that. I agree, but I think and I know you and Cody been holding it down on the Fantasy Authority podcast, and I think Raheem Mostert is going to be a guy we want to monitor and maybe pick up in deep leagues if Tevin Coleman's going to be missing some significant time. All right, Kev, let's move on to wide receivers. It's my favorite to talk about, and we saw why last week, because the variance of wide receivers and what pays off is absolutely incredible, and it just makes DFS so fun to play. And I think that's why the both of us love it so much, is because you can get guys down at the bottom of a barrel who, if you can predict their target share or predict the amount of volume they're going to be seeing, it can really pay off. But it's very different this week, where we have the two guys are priced above 8K, Michael Thomas and DeAndre Hopkins, who both just lit it up on Monday in that same game. DeAndre, 13 targets, 111 yards, 34 DK points is what he was able to put up, 2 touchdowns there. Just absolutely insane. He was just picking apart the Saints secondary, and now he goes against Jalen Ramsey, a guy who he's gone against before, Kev, and seems to have pretty decent games. The both of them pretty much respect each other, and Jalen Ramsey doesn't respect anybody. So the fact that he's out there saying that DeAndre Hopkins is the best receiver in the game, and Hopkins is saying that Ramsey's the best corner in the game, this should be make for interesting theater come Sunday. I think DeAndre Hopkins, I don't know just how you ignore this guy from cash games if you can fit him in. I don't love paying up for receivers in cash, but the amount of targets that he's able to see is absolutely incredible. And while they're still figuring out their run game, I think you got to target him. Michael Thomas, I like him in this matchup if you're doing Rams Saints stacks. Can't guard Mike. We saw why. Again, 13 targets for him as well, 123 yards, no touchdowns, still putting up 25 DK points there. It's just incredible. One guy that I'm looking at, and I'm really gonna try and figure out what I'm gonna do with him come Sunday, is Keenan Allen, Kev. And the reason being is because we know Phillip Rivers is going to sling the rock. Detroit defense, while I believe that Keenan Allen should see some of Darius Slay, they were moving Keenan around last week enough that I feel like he might be able to avoid him. And nobody else on that secondary can guard this guy. Mike Williams is banged up. Hunter Henry's banged up. The target share for Keenan could go through the roof, and he comes in at 7,300. I think the appeal for him in this matchup, and this could actually be a sneaky shootout here going against Detroit, I think has a lot of appeal. Juju Smith-Schuster is somebody I'm going to be monitoring. He's dealing with the toe injury right now. Shout out to Mike Tomlin for just leaving his starters in the fourth quarter when you're down 33-3. It's absolutely ridiculous. Could have had a very more significant injury than he ended up with. So that's interesting to monitor there. And then we got Sammy Watkins. I'm going to just end it right now because I need to let you talk about Sammy Watkins. I know you were high on him last week. So was Maddie. He's seen a ridiculous price increase on DraftKings and FanDuel alike, to be honest, but goes from being priced at 5,000 last week to 7,200, a $2,200 price increase is just insane. Is Sammy Watkins playable this week, Kev? Let's just let cash be what it is. I'm talking about GPPs where the money's made, and a lot of people are going to have a tough time on figuring out what to do with him. And we have no Tyreek Hill. We know that. Going against Oakland, Garyon Conley's hurt. Abram is hurt, the starting safety. Is this something we need to think about, or do we just jam this guy in?
Haven't you already answered the question, though? Like, haven't you already answered your own question with that? Like, I've been seeing it too.
I think I have, but he's 7,200, Kev. It's not like, I was thinking he's 5,000 last week. Maybe we're going to see him at, 65, 67, 7,200 for a guy like Sammy Watkins going on the road. I don't know. Is he jam it in? Is it jam in Sammy and pick the rest of your lineup?
Of course it is. Of course it is. It's Sammy Watkins, the number one wide receiver on a Patrick Mahomes offense. I've been actually surprised that there's been so much people that I don't think you're definitely not alone. I think that's kind of the common theme of people not really knowing what to do with him and thinking that people shouldn't be paying up, $7,200 for him. But I don't think it's that crazy of a price. Like, I still think there's some value to be had there. With Tyreek Hill out of the equation, like, he's going to be the main wide receiver that gets the looks. And the thing that I love about Sammy Watkins is he's like a running back playing wide receiver a lot of times, because his yards after the catch and his ability to break tackles is very few that are in his class when it comes to that. Sammy Watkins' problem has always been being able to stay healthy. Well, right now he's healthy. We know that. And so I'm not worried about anything else. So, like, $7,200 against Oakland with Patrick Mahomes, with less of a target share or target volume that's in his way, with Tyreek Hill being out for the next 3 or 4 weeks, 5 weeks, then, like, seems like such an easy play for me. And, like, I think people are going to overthink this and be like, "Oh, you can't pay $7,200 for Sammy Watkins." Why? Like, he's talented, and, like, he has that ability. That's what the Chiefs paid him to do. That's why they're paying him $16 million. Is to be this guy. And there's been a lot of talk about Sammy Watkins, about how he has kind of rededicated himself to get his body right, to start doing things the right way, and as hope to, get him away from being hurt all the time. So, there's a lot. Like I said, like, I really like Sammy Watkins, and I don't know how you can get away from him at 7,200. I'm gonna have a lot of Sammy Watkins. Regardless, even at 7,200, I think he's well worth it.
Gav, I hear you. I'm all ears, and I'm gonna have to figure out ways to get him in, because I just can't miss out on a guy that plays in this offense with the elements that have factored in to him seeing the field and his playing time. Kev, we talked about the rookie receivers when we were originally talking about quarterbacks, and we have some things to talk about here. So we have Marquise Brown for Baltimore, who, it's ridiculous. Saw 14 snaps in a blowout win, only 5 targets, has 4 catches, 147 yards and 2 touchdowns, and has seen his price jump up pretty significantly, 1,200 on DraftKings from 3,800 to 5,000. But he's dealing with a hip injury. Is it safe to say to go back to the well here? Because I'm looking at a Willie Snead at 4,500. I'm looking at a Miles Boykin coming in at 3,200, almost the bare minimum on DraftKings. And even if Marquise Brown is out, if this hip injury lingers into Friday, into Saturday, and comes Sunday, even if he's playing, he's still kind of banged up. I'm looking at these guys, and I'm not shying away from them, because Willie Snead and Miles Boykin both look like they had roles in this offense too.
Yeah, I mean, if I was gonna play a rookie wide receiver, though, like, for me, like, I don't hate that call, like, especially with Miles Boykin. Like, Miles Boykin is a super athletic wide receiver. He caught a hauled in a touchdown last week, but who didn't against the Dolphins? And the thing is that you have to remember though with Marquise Brown, with old Hollywood here, is that him not playing isn't that huge of an impact. He had 147 yards and 2 touchdowns last week, right?
Right.
He only played 12 snaps.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
14.
So, like, I mean, it's not like he had some big impact and that's freeing up a bunch more, right? He didn't play that much. He was just uber efficient on his opportunities. So, like, if I'm going to be paying for a cheap wide receiver, and I want to play a rookie, especially after everything that's happened, like, I feel like some of these rookies could be higher owned than what they should be just because of their performances. And I think Terry McLaurin is the guy that I would want to target at 3,800. It's not the best matchup, but I mean, this dude had played 93% of the snaps last week. He played very, very well. I mean, he scored 26.5 DK points last week, and he's 3,800. And not a lot of people are going to want to play him because of the matchup. So, like, I really have no problem playing with playing him. I'm definitely going to have some exposure to him because everything's sort of aligning for him to really get sort of a work or really be the number one wide receiver in this offense.
I love that call. He looked great, and for one of the guys that we weren't able to see in preseason as we were breaking down DFS and kind of had burned us on the first 2 weeks there because he had just looked so explosive in camp, and they were talking about how much he was going to be utilized, and we were eager to play him in preseason, and we saw that they were protecting this guy. They wanted him to be out there in their sets and kind of playing and established as their wide receiver one. And they took no time in showcasing that for us in week 1 against Philly. So I definitely love that call there with Scary Terry. Kev, John Ross comes in at 4,600. If you're playing Andy Dalton, I don't know how you can ignore this guy here. 12 targets, 7 catches, 158, 2 touchdowns. This is what people were begging for, beating the drum with when this guy was drafted, saying that he was going to be the standout, receiver in this offense. And we really hadn't seen it until last Sunday in Seattle, just going ham, going bananas, and not really seeing too big of a price increase here. Only goes from 3,900 to 46 is pretty ridiculous going against this San Francisco team that was getting burned by Chris Godwin, another speedy receiver from Tampa Bay last week. So what are we doing with John Ross? And I'm loving him. I think I have him in my cash lineup right now. I'm just trying to figure out GPP exposure.
Yeah, I'm not that high on him this week. Why play him? Why play John Ross, who is very boomer bust, whenever you could play McCall Hardman at 4,800? Who is just, and I don't think McCall Hardman. I don't think he's going to carry much ownership, right? Maybe like 5% owned, right? But he has that same deep speed. He's in a better offense and a better and what should be at least comparable, if not better, game. So it's to me it's way too tough to be able to play him. I would much rather play McCall Hardman or even Demarcus Robinson, I think, than over John Ross. Like, I don't want to get sucked into the week 1, look what this kid did, or look how things went. And then you get overly excited, and then it doesn't turn out the way you want.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you, Kev, but in a situation that he's in, and it's, I really want to know going forward too into the week what Joe Mixon's status ends up being, because without Joe Mixon being in there, I think that just is going to free up Andy Dalton to just sling it around the field against the second. I mean, really, Richard Sherman's the only defensive back that they have that I'm worried about. These other defensive backs from San Francisco can't stop anybody. And I imagine that Richard Sherman will be seeing a little bit of Tyler Boyd there and kind of free up John Ross. He just can't keep up with him speed wise. So at 4,600, it's not really taking a lot of your salary with. And again, like I said, I have him in cash lineups right now. I'm just trying to figure out GPP exposure, but I do think I want some John Ross going against this team, and I want some McCall Hardman too. I just want to see how the how the offense is utilized. And I'm curious to know, like, let's even talk about KC a little bit further with, re-signing DeAnthony Thomas, with having Demarcus Robinson there, which you said Robinson was struggling in camp, and I don't think, the snap share really saw that. But now we have a significant injury for that wide receiver group. Is there anybody else on Kansas City at the wide receiver position that can make something happen in Hill's absence?
So I think it starts with Hardman. Like I think the Chiefs want him to be that guy, and he actually outsnapped Demarcus Robinson last week. It was 52-46. He was also, but I will say this: like the thing is, he only received one target. McCole Hardman. However, Demarcus Robinson, it's not like he received that; he received 2 targets, right? But people have to remember when you start looking at that the Chiefs got up early. That Chiefs offense was rolling quickly. Like, and then the Pat Mahomes injury happened. They went ultra conservative. They stopped letting him, he wasn't able to run the ball anymore. And so just to kind of try to protect Patrick Mahomes. But I know that Demarcus Robinson has the rapport already with Patrick Mahomes. So that was tough. Like I still think, like looking at the price tag of McCole Hardman at 4,800, that's pretty aggressive player who that really has done nothing, right? He literally did nothing. And some of these other players who, like Terry McLaurin, had had a much better game last week, showed much more, is actually significantly cheaper than what McCole Hardman is. I think McCole Hardman definitely has a pretty high ceiling, depending on how things go and depending on how they utilize him this year. But it's just not something that I feel comfortable with like now.
I hear you, Kev. It's definitely going to be one of those things we want to monitor, because any wide receiver that's getting the ball thrown to him from Patty, my homeboy, is going to be fantasy relevant. So I'm very curious to see what the snap shares, what the target shares look like in week 2 going against this Oakland defense. Kev, before we move on to tight end, I think we kind of skipped over a lot of these mid-tier options, so I just want to talk about them briefly. Is there anything that you're seeing here? Minnesota Green Bay game with Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen going on the road there. We talked about Kirk Cousins only throwing it 10 times, but it feels like this is going to be a game where he's going to be relied upon more, so they should see an uptick, but the secondary looks good there. On the other side, you got Devontae Adams, who is going to see Xavier Rhodes, but has caught a touchdown, I believe, in the last 4 matchups against Rhodes, if I'm not mistaken there. So that's interesting to monitor. But really, for me, it comes down to these Rams pass catchers, as I talked about Jared Goff. And the one that's sticking out to me is Robert Woods. Robert Woods he has the highest target share of these 3 receivers. He saw the most air yards out of all these receivers last week, and just always is just consistent, Kev. We talk about Cooper Kupp being consistent and being that slot guy that Jared Goff relies on, but Robert Woods is just always everywhere on the field, running in the slot, running on the outside. 13 targets, 8 catches last week. Had some really big games last year in high total games that the Rams had. And I just feel like, if you can get Robert Woods on the correct week, this guy's winning you a GPP. And maybe Kenny Golladay, you could talk about him in that Chargers game as well too. He should see some huge a huge target share in that matchup. Is there anybody in the mid-tier range that you're looking at for this week?
Yeah, I think there's definitely some plays here. So for me, like I think that Tyler Boyd is definitely in play at 6,500. He did jump up. I think last week is at 5,800, so he did come up there. But he is definitely the man in that offense. Last week he received 11 targets. He hauled in 8 of 11 targets for 60 yards. You want to see a little bit better than that. But overall, that's what I'm looking for, is that volume and those 11 targets. And that he can get close to that every week, at least until AJ Green comes back. It's certainly in the range of possibilities. I think Stephon Diggs is an absolute steal at 6,300. I think he should be priced up a little bit more than that. But I love Tyler Boyd. I had a little bit of him last week, and I mean, he wasn't great, but didn't kill you either. I think he had like 15 DK points. A couple of my favorite plays this week is going to be one being John Brown at 5,200. He's one of those people that played 28%, or excuse me, had 28.3 DK points last week. And so for me, like he has that perfect, and we talked about this a little bit last week too, that he is the perfect complement to Josh Allen. And like he pretty much led the team in everything last week. He led the targets, he led the team in air yards. I mean, there's a lot to like here on this John Brown profile. And going against the Giants, like I like this matchup for John Brown, and I definitely think people should be targeting him there. Until further notice, like he feels like even like season long leagues where like he's somebody that I mean, there's nobody else there, right? It's Zay Jones. They don't really have a tight end. Robert Foster is there, but he has kind of been relegated to nothing. So, like John Brown makes for a fantastic play, especially 5,200. We know he has the ability to find the end zone. So, like, I really do like John Brown, and he's somebody that I think I'm going to have some decent exposure with.
No, I love that call there. Love that call. He's the man, and he's one of three options that Allen will target. So love that. Love that call. Let's move on to tight ends here. And again, it's so the price disparity is just incredible. You got Kelsey, Kittle, Ingram over 5K. Jared Cook is pretty much the only 4K guy because Hunter Henry's ruled out. Vince, and then it's all 3K guys who are absolutely awesome this week, Kevin, and where I kind of just want to pay down for tight end and not even think about it. If I did have to pay up, I think I would lean Kelsey, even with Kittle's target share and 10 targets last week, 2 touchdowns called back in what was a ridiculous game there with tight ends getting touchdowns called back for San Francisco and Tampa Bay. But George Kittle's always in play. But with Kelsey Hill being out, target your tight ends against Oakland. If Flacco could even complete a pass to anybody, Noah Fant had gotten open and gotten loose for Denver. So I think that was, something they were trying to accomplish. They couldn't. Pat Mahomes is going to have that problem. He's the highest priced tight end. I love him in GPPs to get exposure to his team, especially if I'm not able to get Sammy Watkins. I have to have somebody in the offense that I can rely on, and that's Travis Kelce. But in the 3K range, Kev, Mark Andrews at 3,800, way too cheap for the target share that he's seeing. If, Brown's out, I think that Andrews is just a smash play. Just don't even think about it. Darren Waller, this guy was somebody who we saw in Hard Knocks, kind of, revitalizing his career, getting substance abuse. And he's, 8 targets last week, 7 catches, was everywhere, double-digit DK points. And Vance McDonald, I got to talk about him. Didn't have a great game at all last week against the Patriots, but 4 targets there. I think he's going to have a significant role in games that are competitive and where they do need pass catching help. He really opens up the slate. I'm talking about taking Ben. You take a guy like James Washington at 3,600, who I think is the established number 2, because my God, Dante Moncrief is allergic to catching the ball, Kev. It's so ridiculous. It's making me frustrated right now, even thinking about the 3 drops the guy had. So really cheap stack that you can do at Pittsburgh. I think it really opens up the slate. It's just a cheap tight end week, and I don't think you can convince me otherwise, not even talking about a guy like TJ Hawkinson at 3K. What are you looking at tight ends, and where are you finding yourself going?
If I'm going to pay up a tight end, it's more than likely going to be for Travis Kelce. Like, I think he is in a fantastic spot, especially now with Tyreek Hill gone, right?
Yep.
But I think he's also going to have the ownership to show for it as well. Rightfully so. But and maybe he won't, because there is some of these lower priced tight ends that I think that people would maybe rather play. But like Travis Kelce at 7,300 is I don't know if that's high enough, right? heading into this,
He's 7,300.
huh?
How much higher do you want it to be, Kevin? 7,300 at tight end. That's expensive.
But here's the thing, like heading into the season, like when we talked about especially I know redraft and everything's different, but when we were heading in, we thought Tyreek Hill was going to be suspended. People were talking about Travis Kelce taking him in the first round, right? Like taking him ahead of a lot of players that because he gives you wide receiver one type ceiling, right? If you compared him to a top, the top wide receivers, he's down there, we're right around where Sammy Watkins is going. I mean, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 wide receivers that are more expensive than he is. He gives you that kind of ceiling. I know tight end, and I know it's hard to say, well, I don't want to pay up for tight end, but he's the one guy who easily can give you 150 and 2 or 3 touchdowns. That's in his range of possibilities here, especially with Tyreek Hill gone. And so we were all really comfortable with taking Travis Kelce in the first round a couple weeks ago. And that was with the thought process of not having Tyreek. Tyreek Hill's gone, right? He's not in this game. We know this. And we're saying that, I love Sammy Watkins, but we know Pat Mahomes could easily go out here and put up 400 yards and 4 or 5 touchdowns, right? Do you think that he's going to do that with Mecole Hardman and to Marcus Robinson? Sure, he gets spread it around, but I'm telling you, Travis Kelce is going to be heavily targeted in this game. He could easily see 10 to 15 targets in this game and heavily utilized inside the red zone. 7,300 is expensive, but you can make a case that in this matchup, in this game, that he should be viewed as an elite wide receiver, top 3 wide receiver type player, and he's not. He's coming in around wide receiver 8, wide receiver 7, but his is so high that he's worth it.
No, I hear you, Kev. I hear you. I love him. I don't think he's going to be as high owned as you think too, because he is the most expensive tight end, and because of Sammy Watkins. I think people are still just averse to trying to, take this team as a smash spot. If this game were KC at home, I think it'd be a lot different. But on the road, I think people are, the average fan is probably looking at Mahomes being banged up. They're looking at Tyreek Hill being gone now. And I just don't know, especially with guys like Mark Andrews and Darren Waller, who popped off last week and are just so much cheaper to let you get in some of these other players. So I'm going to be monitoring the owner percentage, because if Kelce is, not within the top 3 of own percent, which I don't know how it could be, but if it's low, I'm going to be jamming this dude in. I just don't want him to be priced higher than 7,300. Make it harder on our teams. What else, Kev? You're the tight end whisperer. Anybody that you're seeing under 3K or popping off in the 3K range below? Are you gonna talk to me about Jack Doyle, like Maddie was trying to convince himself last week? Actually, Jack Doyle didn't have that bad of a game. Only 2 targets, but it seemed like he was out there a lot more. Noah Fant going against Chicago, he's 3K. Blake Jarwin, is he usable? You're the whisperer, Kev. Let's open it up and talk about some of these low-owned guys.
Well, first of all, I think some of the players you've already mentioned, I think Vance McDonald was certainly one. He burned a lot of people, especially on that showdown slate. At 3,900 is certainly in play. Mark Andrews, we know that he's very boom or bust. Went out and dropped 27.8 DK points. But this is a fantastic matchup against Arizona. It's not as good as the Miami matchup, but it's right up there with it, especially with their secondary and everything. Also at 3,800, I think you can go there. Darren Waller is somebody I've been on all off season. I really like him. He, last week was 7 for 70, on 8 targets. I think he's in play at 3,300. Jordan Reed will have to wait and see what happens if he comes out of concussion protocol. That kind of changes a lot of things. But if he's out there against Dallas, at 3,400, I'm going to have some interest there, and I'm going to want to play him. So I think that's one way you could go to get a little bit different, because I feel like, heading into the season, I felt like he was easily they're going to be the target leader for this offense, and he until he took that brutal hit in the week 4 preseason, which the dude never should have been playing in, but
Right.
he's making progress, and if he's able to get back on the field at 3,400, I think that's definitely a way you could go. Going further down, like there's nothing that like right now is just like standing out to me, other than I did notice that the man Tyler Croft is trending in the right direction. He is he's back at practice. He's getting into practice now, so it's not too far off that Tyler Croft, the man, the myth, the legend, will be back.
Good Lord. Oh my God. Kev without the beard. That's how we refer to him here on this podcast. I love it, Kev. Let's wrap it up with defense so we can build this Millie team for the people. We kind of have seen last week we talked about it. San Francisco defense, they were cheap. They paid off dividends against Jameis. Getting those turnovers and paying down for defense really does have a great contrarian approach. I'm not sure what I'm going to do this week at defense outside of I know I want the Ravens. I know I want the Patriots. Maybe paying up for the Bears is going to be contrarian. 3,900. Joe Flacco looked abysmal. They are going to be playing at home, but it's against Vic Fangio, their old defensive coach. I can see the narrative there already. So maybe my contrarian approach will be to pay up. But for you, is there any defense that is flying under the radar for you that you would want exposure to on Sunday?
There's nothing that really stands out to me right now that like I'm just like, oh, I definitely want to do this. I mean, I think the Steelers, you could do that at 2,400. Now that they're at home, I think that's one that you could possibly look at. I definitely think that the Bears for sure, paying up for the Bears 3,900. I don't really like paying up for defenses all that much, but like I think you could just see how this could really turn awful for the Broncos really quickly. And so at 3,900, I think you could definitely go with him. I mean, other than that, like right now, there's nothing that I'm just like, oh, okay, yeah, I definitely want in on some of that. Like especially the lower tiers of maybe the Colts at 2,500, the Jags, especially how bad the Houston offensive line, even though they did add Laramie Tunsil, but overall that offensive line is still pretty bad. So at 2,400, if you want to get on some Jaguars, I think you could do that. Because I mean, last week against the Chiefs, they were and the Chiefs have one of the better offensive lines in the league. I mean, they were getting after Pat Mahomes. Like their pass rush is definitely still there. So like I think that could be an issue for Houston and for that. So you could see a couple turnovers, you could see a fumble, some sacks. So yeah, I mean, if I would stake my claim to one low price defense right now, it would be the $2,400 Jaguars.
I don't mind that call at all, Kev. 6 sacks is what Houston gave up last week to New Orleans, and Jacksonville is going to be their pride's on the line, this defense, after the showing that they had last week, and Miles Jack getting thrown out of the game, ejected for throwing a punch, and just really coming off of the seams. So they have a lot to prove here, and Deshaun looked really beat up towards the end of that game. So that could be something to monitor. I don't mind that call at all there for the Jags. Guys, you know what time it is. It's that time of the show. We got to build our Millie team. Millie team last week put up 192, Kev. Really good there with Maddie getting us on the Cowboys and Dak Prescott stack. Put Saquon in to run it back with. Tyler Lockett, he caught a touchdown late. That kind of saved his day. And then we also had, even with the Dolphins D scoring -3, having Evan Ingram in that same game too really paid off. And then John Brown, guy you just sung a soliloquy about put up 28.3. So 192 for the Millie team. That's pretty nice. Let's try and break that 200 threshold this week, and we are going to build the Millie team for DFS DGen Nation Week 2 right now. Kev, let's get into the lineup here, and we had a full slate here. It's just me and you. I think I went second last week with Maddie as the guest. So why don't you start it off and let us know what we're starting with and how the team's going to be built.
All right, I can easily do that. So let's go ahead, and I want to lock in Alvin Kamara at the 8,200.
I love it. I love it. Cannot complain about that at all. I'm going to stick on that same game as well too, Kev, and I want to play Robert Woods this week. He's 6,400, so I'm going to put him in.
All right, so I'm going to get a little bit different at quarterback, and I'm going to go with Derek Carr at 5,100.
All right. So Derek Carr, 5,100. So we definitely want to run it back. So it's a matter of who we run it back with. You know what? I'm going to say let's put in Waller as opposed to Kelsey. Or maybe we could still do Kelsey too with 2 tight end team. But Waller at 3,300 to pair with Derek Carr, I think just makes a ton of sense and really frees up salary.
You know, I thought you were going to do it. I thought you were going to nail it, and I thought you were going to give me Tyrell Williams. I don't even know if I mentioned him at 4,400. That is an absolute steal for the number 1 wide receiver on this offense. But, yeah. Let's go. What?
We got options, Kev.
Let's go. I'm going to go Keenan Allen at 7,600.
Love that. Love that. See what we got here. We're gonna run it back. You know, we both talked about how we loved them. Sonny Michel, I think we need some exposure to the Patriots side of the game. He's 6,200, putting him in at running back. So now we got 4,400 left for 3 positions to fill: wide receiver, flex, defense, 13,200 remaining salary.
All right. Let's see how this works. I don't know if this is going to work out or not. We're going to have to go cheap at defense, but let's run it back with a stack with Sammy Watkins.
Okay, Sammy Watkins we put in. So 3K per player left. Defense, we're looking at want to go in that 2K range. So we could play Jacksonville there. You know what? Let's see what we can do with just going not too cheap, but Bengals D at home, 2,600, 3,400 left for the flex. What does that leave us with? Pretty ugly. Who are you looking at, Kev, in this range? Because even if we play Jacksonville, that's 2,400. That's the $3,600 player.
You know what we're going to do? What we're going to do. I'm going to swap out my Sammy Watkins pick, and I'm going to play McCole Hardman.
Okay.
Which will then leave us 5,800. And I'm going to play. Oh, look at that. John Brown. So it is even an extra 600 if you wanted to go further in defense. But I'll go John Brown and McCall Hardman.
So we play John Brown. Now, important thing to do here is I believe KC Oakland is the later game. So we're going to put John Brown, who plays early, the wide receiver spot. Put Hardman in the flex, just in case we want to pivot. 3,200. There's no defense I'm really loving. Green Bay at home, they looked well against the Bears on Thursday night. Not really loving Tennessee or Detroit. I mean, could we play Houston against Minshew? Bounce back spot.
I don't know what defense shows up, or what Minshew shows up, because he looked okay. I mean, he certainly can do it. I mean, he's a 6th-round pick. I mean, now the teams are going to be able to see. I mean, see who this guy is and have a little bit of tape on him.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I think you could go there if you want to go Texans. I mean,
I'm just not in love with it. I think let's lock in Green Bay for now and keep the people monitored, especially in the Slack on what we end up doing, because I know a lot of the Slack loves the Millie team and wants to see what we're on. And we can, we leave it out open-ended that barring any news, if we hear anything about any of these players, changes made, we'll release that and let you guys know. But as of this time right now, our week 2 Millie Maker lineup is Derek Carr, Alvin Kamara, Sony Michel, Robert Woods, Keenan Allen, John Brown, Darren Waller, McCole Hardman, and the Packers D. 100 left on the table. Kev, I just submitted it. It is in, and that is going to do it for the DFS DGen Nation podcast for this week. Kev, it's going to be fun. The week 2 is one of the best to play as people overreact from week 1, and there's going to be a lot of ways to kind of take advantage of the slate. I'm really looking forward to it. And talk to the people, Kev. How can they find this content? Where's it going to be released? And I talked about that Slack. How can they get in it?
Yeah, so basically with the Slack, like you mentioned, it's popping all the time, and you can either reach out to me on Twitter, jump into my DMs at DFS or at FantasyWrath13, and I will be there to help you out and get you into it. It's free. That's all I can say. I mean, it's free. So most DFS places, especially, they charge you a subscription, everything else to be in one. So I definitely think there's a lot of value there. We have a lot of discussion, a lot of conversations about what's going on. So yes, I implore you to get into that. Like I said, or you can go to the FF_authority, the Fantasy Authority Twitter handle, and I know there are invites there as well to get in. Past that, we have all this content on YouTube. I would like anybody to, I really appreciate all the like and the subscribes. We're really trying to build this up. I'm probably going to break this podcast down into segments to quarterbacks, running back, wide receivers, and tight ends, so it's easier to digest. If you don't have time to sit here and listen to an hour and 20-minute podcast, if you want to watch the 20-minute quarterback segment or running back segment, whatever, it'll be there for you to do that as well. So, we appreciate all the love and the support, but we'll be dropping Friday mornings. Last week was a little bit of an issue, but overall, I'm happy with the way things are going. We're going to have some good guests on this year as well. So everything's trending in the right direction.
Yeah, we're trending up here at the DFS DGen Nation. Thank you guys for tuning in, and thank you guys for listening. DFS DGen Nation podcast, episode 58. Coming at you. It's week 2. We're excited about it. We want you guys winning this money. Hop into the Slack chat. Follow the content on the fantasyauthority.com. A lot of the guys putting out posts there. I know our boy Nick is on it. Pete's been putting out content. Justin Mandaro, J.R. Reynolds, Eric as well too, and myself with the Contrary 10. All going to be live towards the end of this week by Friday. Keep a lookout for that, guys. And we will catch you next week for week 3. It's the DFS Degen Nation. Ryan Williams, your host at Ryan_Alexander_W, and your other host, Kevin Steele at Fantasy Rat 13, signing out. Peace.